Hi, my name is Tori Letzler. I'm a composer and vocalist for film, television, and video games, and I'm going to walk you through how I score a scene. For today's purposes only, this is a 30-second clip. It's not part of a bigger television series or a movie, so it's going to be a lot simpler, but I think it'll be easier for me to break down for you guys. Basically, our video starts with a very simple scene of two people swimming around in mysterious dark waters, coming together, and they're going to grab each other's hands and then push each other away and float away. So the first thing I would do is, if you're looking at my session, and I'm in the DAW Reaper, which is kind of a less commonly used DAW, but it's really good for scoring and it works great with audio. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my video and I'm going to go, okay, what tempo do I think this should be at in order to hit the important points in the video that I want to hit in terms of story? So this is a very simple video, but we know that, okay, right at this mark right here is when they're going to link hands. Around this mark right here is when they push each other away, and we know where the video starts and where it ends. Very straightforward. So I will figure out a tempo. In this case, it ended up being 105, which I figured out in advance of this, which will get me close to landing on those moments on bars and beats. So I stay on a grid so that anything that I'm hitting makes sense musically when I get further along into the process. Then I will create physical markers that say what those elements are. So music in, hands link, push hands away, mix out. That's like any scene that I'm doing start to finish, no matter what it's in. If it's into picture, those are the first things I have to do. You're creating a roadmap for yourself. Once I've done that, I will go through the video and see, okay, most of this is lining up. My hands link lines up where I want it to. But I get to this bar 14 point and okay, the hand pushing away without what I've done here was not quite on a correct beat or bar. So we'll do what is very common in scoring. It's called meter changes. And two ways that you can typically hit stuff on bars or beats. You can do a meter change. So I started at 4/4 tempo, and then I changed it to 6/4 tempo so I could land on a proper beat here for that moment. Or you can also do things like tempo ramps. In this case, it was just easier to do a meter change, but tempo ramps or tempo changes are also really frequent. In films and TV, because you are scoring such a long piece of media, obviously you're not going to stay in 100 BPM 4/4 the entire time. There's peaks and valleys, lots of dynamics, lots of changes in the story. Whether you're scoring, two people walking down the street or a chase, those are all very different things that have to happen seamlessly. But for this, it's a very simple video, so very simple changes. Now that we've marked all of that out, we're going to figure out what we want the scene to sound like. If I look at the scene, it's just very beautiful, mysterious, lit kind of darkly, two people, maybe they're in love, maybe they're not, floating around in the water. So I actually started here with a sample from my pack, and it's called Northern Lights. It's one of the ambient samples that I did. I didn't change it at all. I have not added effects to the sample. It's just a ambience pad that I thought fit this scene very well. So it's got that very like floaty nature to it. It's not quite, technically it's C minor, but it's kind of going between minor and major. It's not too heavy, there's no bass in it. And I thought, well, that's gonna be a great thing to use as my bass for the cue. And by the way, in scoring, that's what we call individual pieces of music. We call them cues. So having this as a bass, I go, I'm gonna work from the ground up. So I have this already in here. Then I gotta think, okay, I'm in the key of C. So what's the next thing that I can do? For me, the easiest thing to start with is building strings. And because there's not a ton going on screen and we don't really know what's going on, I don't want to give it a full section here. We just want to kind of ease into it. And I'm going to open up these strings for a second so you guys can just see how I've programmed these. So obviously these are MIDI strings. You can see all of my chords here. In this range, I'm not going below C3. I'll have additional strings doing the lower register at a point. And the things that I've programmed, you have velocity down here. And then it's always important with orchestral instruments, but specifically strings, that you write in volume and modulation, because In most cases, orchestral instruments are very responsive to those types of data, and without it, it's just not going to sound organic. It's going to sound like the instrument is going straight ahead. So if I hadn't done that, you wouldn't really feel the push and pull that I think the scene is giving emotionally. I look at programming for strings and other instruments that kind of have a lot of emotion to them, almost like breathing. So when you're going in and out, and that's how I would program, is I really just think about following my own breath and when I'm watching picture. I don't know if that's a weird thing that I do and no one else does, but that's how I look at it. So now that we have our strings and our pad down, I'm going to take the bass line that I've created in the strings, and I'm going to play it down the lower register. And I have this on my cellos and basses. So just giving it some nice bottom end and warmth. And then I'm going to double those basses on a synth bass. So for me, as a composer, a lot of us have templates. So I work as a composer and also in EDM. When I'm making an EDM track or, songwriting in any way, I don't start with a template. I start totally from scratch. Every song is different. I have things that are my go-tos, but it's all from scratch. When you're working in film, a lot of times we're doing big sessions, big orchestral sessions. So we will work from templates. This is kind of what my standard template looks like, is that all of my strings are organized by register, if they're long or short, and kind of the standard samples that I would pull from. In scoring, time is money. And so anything that can go to help speed up your creativity and not put any roadblocks in your way so that you can just get in the studio and go is ideal. The next thing, which I think is one of the most important things, is I wanted to come up with a melody. Now, we have this vocal already that's from the pack. Very ambient, a little, you can tell that there's vocals in it, but it's very much just setting the tone. So I thought, okay, we need to describe what's going on screen in a very quick but emotional manner. So the way that I looked at this, without any larger context, is, okay, when their hands link, we want something to change on that. That's an important moment in the scene. And when they push their hands away, we want that to signify something. So the best way for me to do that, and a lot of the ways that I write, is using voice as a melody. Now, sometimes I'll write with voice and end up switching it to a different instrument later on, but I quite literally will set up a mic right here next to me on the daily and start building a cue, sing into it, do a bunch of takes, and then build the rest of the cue over top of a vocal. Not everybody does that. I'm a vocalist, so that's, my tool of choice. We have a vocal that introduces our melody in the beginning. Then when the hands link, the melody goes up, signifying we're moving forward. And then when we have the hands push away, it's a resolve of sorts. So you have a beginning and middle and an end all in this little 30-second package. After that, before I started getting into, making everything sound all nice, I wanted to have a secondary melody come in just to keep the story going along, so we're not just with these beautiful patty things. I grabbed this celeste, which is also from Spitfire. I'm a big fan of this instrument. For those who aren't familiar, a real celeste, not a virtual one. It kind of looks like a mini piano. It's a very old instrument, super high register. Most people would know it from Hedwig's theme from Harry Potter, John Williams. It's that super high instrument. So very magical sounding, light. So I just wanted to add that in as our little counter melody here. And that's going to be going against the vocal and against the bass line a little bit. So let's get into kind of the nitty gritty of how I produced all this stuff. So on the Celeste out of the box from Spitfire, it sounds great, but it's a little bright. So what I did is I added in this Moog filter that I'm a big fan of, and I adjusted the cutoff so that we're really kind of closing off that sound, curving off some of that high end, and I put up the drive a little bit. The next thing I wanted to do is pretty much everything in this session is staying in the center and relatively static because it's not a large session. But for this, because it's the movement that's coming in later, I wanted it to feel like water and feel like we were going back and forth. So I do have one of my favorite plugins, Pan Man from Sound Toys, and I just have it on this minor movement. It's just moving back slightly back and forth, like ever so slightly. I wanted to have a really long shimmery reverb on here, which is Valhalla Shimmer. It's very aptly named. I switched it to its dark mode, have everything kind of standard as is. I think I brought the highs down a little bit, but this just gives like a really, really long, wet, magical tail to kind of anything you put it on. And so to get into the meat of the vocal here, this vocal's pretty simple. So I'm gonna do something I hate doing, which is I'm gonna play the raw, non-affected vocal. So that's just straight into my microphone with my outboard compressor, nothing fancy. And then I will go and add what is in my mind is a very simple chain for this, but you'll see how much depth it makes. So I do use auto-tune, not a lot, but I think, you know, to smooth stuff out, it can be really helpful. This one is my go-to. I tend to keep things chromatic, even if they are going minor or between minor and major. I just find chromatic tends to grab things better. The next thing I'm gonna do is add more compression. I have my outboard compressor, but I love compression. I think everyone loves compression. So I'll bring the attack up to 3 every time I do vocals. And I'm just adding like the slightest bit of compression here. So this is without the compressor. This is with. It's not making a huge difference, but it's enough where it's just pushing it forward a little bit in the mix. It's making everything just kind of sound fuller and yeah, I don't know. It just sounds better to me. And then the next thing I'm gonna add is another compressor, although Soothe does more than just compress. So Soothe, I use a lot on vocals. It's adding some compression. It's also taking out some of those harsh frequencies, as you can see here. And I just think that this performs beautifully on vocals, especially cinematic vocals that tend to be airier and breathier. It just makes everything sound a little bit rounder. The next thing that I added was just delay or echo. In this case, Echo Boy, which is another favorite of mine from Sound Toys. I'm gonna take off the reverb and the Echo Boy so you can hear real quick without. It's just kind of harsh. So when I add back on the echo and then my reverb, I have it set to a single echo. I really like using the style of verbed, and I pull it down so it's not too wet in the mix because I don't want it like overwhelming everything. And then something I do, which people may or may not agree with, is I put my reverb after my echo, in this case, in the chain. And my reverb is set really high. It's set to 76%. This is my favorite reverb of all time, the Lexicon Random Hall. If you ever hear vocals from me on anything, there is a 99% guarantee that this is on it. I don't know, it's just magic. So with those together, and then also added a little EQ again from FabFilter. I use this EQ on everything. In my mind, this is actually a really simple chain. I'm not doing, any crazy effects or, distorting or doing anything nuts. It's just trying to make the sound that my mic captured in my performance just the better, more ethereal version of me. Now, the last few things that I added in here are just some fun little effects. So these are just kind of some affected string harmonics with like a little bit of, we'll say it's piano in the background following the top line of my chords. And that is coming from one of my favorite libraries called Arcus from Native Instruments. This library I absolutely love because it's all organic orchestra that has been run through all kinds of reverbs and sparkles and things like that. So it's just making these things sound slightly less organic than they would in real life. Really good for layering, really good for magical, mysterious type things, just adding like just some depth to what you're doing. And then the last thing I have, again, just a simple pad. I think we're holding on, we're actually holding on the G. So the piece is in C minor, but the sample that I used as the bass, even though it's in C minor, you're really hearing like that G in there really strongly. So I wanted to layer something to hold a pedal on that G. And the stuff that I'm using on this, again, Arcus. It's just another Arcus preset that I've messed with. And then this great plugin that I use all the time called Wider from Polyverse. It's an infected mushroom. It does exactly what it says it's gonna do. It literally makes a stereo widening of your sound. And I have it set to 45% here. It's really great on stuff like this, like pads or just little accents that you wanna just fill space better. Then I'm using Portal, which is a granular delay, starting with the preset Ambient Lake. I have it all the way up. I've messed with this a little bit. I love using Portal. I love using delays, especially in scoring when you're trying to fill space. I like when things feel like they're moving around, especially nowadays when a lot of stuff is, mixed in surround, mixed in Atmos. Having things like that that make you feel immersed in a world is something that I really like. And then last, again, we have the Valhalla Shimmer reverb. So yeah, I'm gonna play the whole thing again, and that's my little, quick breakdown of this. I hope that this new pack, alongside my tips, really inspires you guys to get out there and go make some innovative sounds. Once again, my name's Tori Letzler. You can download my pack, Tori Letzler Cinematic Vocals 2, on Splice now.